Hi, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Your City, Your County. And today we're very pleased to have with us Joel Kitchens from the 1st Assembly District. Welcome.
Well, thank you, Bob.
Nice to have you with us.
Always great to be here.
Very nice to have you here. What's going on down in Madison these days? Anything interesting at all?
Yeah, well, it's been sort of a new world this session that we have a governor from the other party, so we have split government, and I think everybody's still feeling their way around that and how that works. So to be honest, we're certainly not passing the number of bills that we passed previously. I think Governor Evers has only signed 20 bills into law since he's taken over the job. So not as much going on. To a lot of people, that's probably a good thing that we're not getting a lot done. But we're still feeling our way around that. We're trying to find some areas that we can work on. Obviously, there are plenty of areas that we disagree on. But last week we were in session and we did a number of items on suicide prevention, which I think obviously both sides can agree we need to do what we can on that. Tomorrow we'll be doing some things dealing with adoption. We're on the floor again tomorrow. But again, it's been a little difficult. I think that it's just. I don't know how to quite put this, I guess. Tommy Thompson, when he was governor, he was sort of a master at bringing the two parties together and getting in a room and say, let's work out a deal. And I don't think we're there right now. I don't think the leadership on either side, where we have somebody that's able to do that, to just work together and really come up with some compromises. So, the result is that just not a lot getting done. And I'm not going to put the blame on either side. It's sort of both sides that are in their corners and they're just not getting together and working out compromises.
We'll let our audience choose their side.
Yeah,
okay.
They can do
How
that,
about
right?
if we do that? Okay. It's good to know that at least you're moving ahead on some situations, as you'd mentioned, with the suicide and that sort of effort.
Yeah. One of the areas that we've been working on a lot is clean water. And, Kewaunee County has sort of been the epicenter of that whole thing, that people around the state, at least for quite some time, when they would hear Kewaunee County, first thing they think of is contaminated wells. So a lot has gone on in that. I think what's happened is that people around the state have realized that Kewaunee County is not unique in having bad water. That we're not even the worst in the state. There are other counties that have worse problems than we do.
Sure.
And honestly, it's gotten to the point now, I think, where people are looking at Kewaunee County and saying, wow, they did a lot of things right. They're really moving the process along. And I know, the county conservationist here in Kewaunee County, Davina Paness, she's gotten a lot of calls from other parts of the state wondering how it was done. But it happened because we all worked together sort of on the state level, as well as the county board and the local governments, and then with the conservation office. So I think really a lot of good has happened in Kewaunee County, and other areas are really recognizing that now. So I'm on the speaker's task force for clean water, and we've traveled all over the state. And every place is a little different. Our issues here are different from other places, but again, Kewaunee County comes up repeatedly, and more it's getting to be in a positive light.
I remember some years ago going into portions of Kewaunee County, and I think particularly further south, and you'd see big signs saying, we want clean water. They were on both sides of the issue at that time. But I guess the question is, how can anybody disagree with wanting clear water anyway?
Right. Yeah, it's just, of course, most of the water issues in Kewaunee County center around farming. And so it's difficult to find that balance between, we don't want to put the farmers out of business. That's the biggest industry in Kewaunee County.
Sure.
And so we don't want to put them out of business, but we want clean water. So that has been the key, though, in Kewaunee County, is bringing the two sides together and coming up with solutions that both sides could agree on. And we ended up getting new rules written for how they handle manure in Kewaunee, in northeast Wisconsin. And because that's something we'd wanted for a long time, because it's different up here. Why should we have the same rules that they have out in the Central Sands? So we finally got that done, and in the end, the rules were endorsed by both the conservation groups like the League of Conservation Voters, Clean Wisconsin, but also by the Farm Bureau and Dairy Business Association. So when you can do that and come up with things that both sides can agree on, and I'm not saying the problems are completely solved by any means. We still are working towards that. But I think we have made some big strides. So
If you can resolve questions between farmers and the clean water people, I think perhaps you could do something in Washington from the two sides there.
well, it honestly, the key is just get the two sides together instead of everybody throwing bombs at each other. Just sit down and talk, because you find out that the farmers want clean water too, but they also want to stay in business. So I think usually if you can just get people to sit down and talk, you find there is some common ground. And also I think that in Kewaunee County it got so much attention that the farmers realized that we have to do something different. We can't keep doing things the same way and that we have. So it's a process to get to that point. I'm sure when it first came along, the farmers were like, hey, we've been doing it this way forever, why should we change? But now they realize that they have to do something different.
Yeah.
So
I always thought, and you and I held a similar position at one point as president of a school board, I and then you a little later. And I remember disagreements that we would have with the teachers, and I always thought it would be wonderful if we could all sit down with perhaps some bubbly or at least with a Coke or a 7-Up and sit around a fire and discuss things. And I think sometimes that's the best way to do that.
It absolutely is, and it's just unfortunate that I think it's reached the point in Madison and in Washington where that just doesn't happen enough. I have good friends that are Democrats, and we get together and talk and stuff, but it's not really the leadership doing that so much, and making that honest effort to see the other viewpoint and see what you have in common. Because at the end of the day, when you sit down with people, you find that you have more in common than you disagree on generally, and they're not evil people.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and I don't want to get too much on that order of things, but I remember in years gone by when Tip O'Neill would be sitting down with Everett Dirksen, two opposites,
Right.
in the political scale, and they would work things out, and it would seem as though perhaps that might be a way that we could resolve an awful lot of issues.
No, and again, I looking back to Tommy Thompson, he was very much of that. He was that type of guy that could just sit down and say, "Okay, let's work this out." So hopefully in the future, but right now, when you watch the news, it doesn't give you much hope for that.
It's definitely not that way. No. How is consumer trade going for the state? I've heard a lot about the situation with China, where we're in the middle of a trade war, and they're putting on trade war things, and we're doing the same. How is that affecting the state?
Yeah, I think probably the farmers are the ones that have borne the brunt of that more than anyone else. Now, it's all going to depend how it plays out. I mean, if it works out and we get a better deal from China, then it will have been worth it, to have a more sustainable situation long term. Because we have not. It's not been very fair to our markets sometimes in how we've been treated around the world. So, we'll see how it plays out. But certainly the farmers they've borne the brunt of it as far as their exports. And with a lot of those commodities, and certainly with milk, I was a dairy veterinarian, so that was my life for a long time.
Right, you worked with the cows and the big animals.
Yeah, so little changes in exports can have a huge effect on the prices here in the U.S. So it certainly has affected that. I will say overall, our economy, though, in Wisconsin is doing extremely well. Our manufacturing job increases are among the top. I think we are the top in the Midwest and amongst the top in the nation. Our unemployment rate is record lows, which that brings on a whole new set of problems as far as, right now it's hard to find labor. And so, we're doing everything that we can to bring people into the workforce and, get them off of, welfare or whatever, bring them into the workforce. And immigration, of course, plays into that too. But that is one of our biggest challenges right now. It's holding a lot of businesses back that they just can't find workers.
Yeah, that's hard, and we've talked about that on this show with various guests, and I know it's a very common topic about finding homes for those people who are not real wealthy,
right.
Affordable housing, and what is affordable housing. Has the legislature and has the Senate for the state, have they done much in that direction?
We have not done much with housing. That's there's some more federal programs available. I try to help whenever. Certainly, Door County has been making an effort to try to increase their affordable housing. There's not a lot that we offer on the state level to help with that. I again try to help wherever we can, but that is a big challenge. It's just.
And you're one guy who,
Yeah.
and there's a lot of other guys and women, of course, too, out there
Yeah.
that are on that are in the assembly, and for them it may not be as big an issue.
Right, but the worker shortage is certainly, an issue all across the state. It doesn't matter where you are. There are not enough workers, and you really worry about the future. That some of this gets into education too, but especially the trades, electricians, plumbers, and all that. They're aging so much that what are we going to do in another 10 years when they're all retiring? And that's part of the problem, is that baby boomers are retiring in big numbers now, and we don't.
That's what I understand.
But we don't have enough people to replace them, and northern Wisconsin especially is aging very rapidly, and who's going to be there to provide the services for those elderly people?
Yeah, and I know that particularly Kewaunee and Door County as well have some of the oldest populations probably in the state.
Right, and if you look at the projections, it's only going to get worse. So it's going to be a challenge.
How do you see this affecting a controversial topic again, Foxconn?
Yeah, Foxconn. I supported giving them the tax credits. Sometimes we hear that, you're spending all this money that could have been spent on education or whatever, and that's not really accurate. Right now, they have not received a penny from the state. It's all in tax incentives that they have to hire 13,000 people, and they have to build a $10 billion plant, and then they get some tax breaks. If they don't do that, they don't get them. So it is incentivized that way. The way I view it is that Southeast Wisconsin it's such a depressed area. It has been for a long time. Even though we have this booming economy, we still have a huge number of people that are unemployed down there, or employed in very low-paying jobs. Where Foxconn, those jobs are going to average more than $50,000 a year, and it's an opportunity, I think, to transform the economy in that area. It used to be that Milwaukee had a thriving, African American middle class population. We had all these, high-paying blue-collar jobs, but those things, a lot of them went to other countries. It was the old Rust Belt thing, and we haven't replaced those yet. When you look at cities like Minneapolis, they have a lot of high-tech jobs there, and their economy has done well. But Milwaukee has sort of been left behind. So I think it's incumbent on us to do what we can to help replace that. And it's not just Foxconn, really. It's all those other businesses that build up around it that'll be supplying all their supplies and all of the other jobs that come with it. And I mean, yes, there's a worker shortage right now, but I think that it is an opportunity to bring in new people from outside the state as well. That Wisconsin does very poorly in retaining our young people. We lose way more than we bring in. And they'll be hiring a lot of engineers and that kind of thing. So hopefully, if things work out the way they should, we'll be bringing in a lot of people and hopefully really stimulating that area down there, which desperately needs it.
Do you have any inside information as to how it's really coming?
Well, I think it's coming along as planned. They've made some changes. I mean, one of the things people say, they scaled back what they were going to do, because initially they were going to be producing these football stadium kind of glass panels, and they scaled that back. Well, the reason they did that is because they realized that they were going to need a glass factory right there, a Corning factory, right there to do that. And to bring that in, they wanted more tax incentives. Well, it's like we couldn't give them any more tax incentives. So because then now they have to bring glass in from, I think, Kentucky. That was one of the reasons they scaled it back, and they still plan on producing the same number of jobs and all that kind of thing. But they'll be working on the smaller screens, which they're still big, but not the mammoth size ones.
I hadn't heard that, so maybe more people need to
hear
those things.
Foxconn got so politicized that there were people, and there still are, that are just seem to be rooting for them to fail. It's they blamed Governor Walker and it's this big corporate giveaway, blah blah blah. But so it's hard to get the true story on that, because whenever there's the slightest little negative thing, like when they change the size of screens they're going to do, a whole bunch of people just start saying, "See, I told you it was never going to work out," and all that. But it's going along. I just drove past there. I went to a wedding out of state and drove past there yesterday, and it's coming along. They've put in hundreds of millions of dollars worth of infrastructure already down there. So,
I know the roads and so on
Right.
down there are real. That's quite a change.
Right, and that is the one area where, yes, we've spent tax money. I mean, those roads were going to have to. That work was going to be done eventually anyway, but it got speeded along because of Foxconn, because they need that there. But it's a mammoth operation down there that they're working on, and it's coming along fine. I mean, they're not pulling out by any means.
Okay. Are they working on the factory and that sort
Yeah,
of thing?
yeah, they are.
Good.
Yeah, there's one building that's
Okay.
up already. I know,
Good.
and yeah,
Okay.
So-
All right. Well, it's good to hear both sides of the story. Definitely.
yeah.
Well, you've talked, and I know have been very involved in education. Obviously, in the first place, working with school board in Sturgeon Bay, and that you have brought a lot of that knowledge to the assembly. What all have you been doing lately, and how are you involved? I know that you're the chairman of, is it the Education Committee?
Yeah, I'm vice chairman of the Education
chairman?
Committee, but then I was also the co-chairman, along with Senator Luther Olson, of the Blue Ribbon Commission on School Funding, where we tried to fix the funding formula. And as a former school board member, that's been sort of broken for a long time. I think we made good progress. I think we went all around the state and had discussions, and you heard a lot of the same issues. I mean, sure, Milwaukee's different from the North Woods, but a lot of the same issues, there was a lot of commonality with that as well. So, I think this budget came out and was actually very good for our schools. We increased the level of reimbursement for special education, because the way that has worked is that schools have to provide those services for special education. Each kid gets an individualized education plan, and they have to supply those services. So they end up pulling money away from regular education because they have to provide those services. And then as you get more and more special ed kids, that really creates a drain on the rest of it. So we were able to increase that reimbursement, and hopefully that continues. One thing that's very important to our schools around here, we raised the minimum level that schools can be funded, because our schools around here, every one of them in our area really, in Kewaunee County anyway, is spends well below the state average. So we brought that level up so that our kids here can get the same opportunities that they do elsewhere. One issue that we worked on that we didn't solve, that I hope we can, is the manner that the funding formula addresses declining enrollment. And that from your days too. That
Sure.
I always thought that was the biggest flaw in the funding formula, is that if you lose 10 kids spread over 13 grades, you don't lose $100,000 in expense, but you do lose $100,000 in funding. So declining enrollment, it doesn't handle it very fairly. They assume that you lose all those costs, but you still have the same costs with the buildings and all.
And you still have the teachers,
Right.
because you lose one student out of the fifth grade or something, you still need a fifth grade teacher.
Right. So you have all those fixed costs that don't go away when you lose a student, and the formula doesn't address that. So we worked out a manner to where you would only lose the variable cost, not the fixed cost, when you lose students. We're still working on getting that passed. We didn't get it put into the budget like we'd have liked to, but hopefully we will get that done, because that has affected all the school districts in our area. Luxembourg, Casco, I think their enrollment's probably staying pretty steady, because there are a lot of people still moving in from the Green Bay area and
Sure.
all that. But certainly Algoma and Kewaunee, Southern Door, Sturgeon Bay have all experienced declining enrollment. Almost all of rural Wisconsin is in that situation.
Sure.
And that's the reason schools are always going to referendum, is because of declining enrollment.
I remember years and years ago, using Sturgeon Bay as an example, we could simply go out and say, well, we need some more money. Okay, well, let's just increase the taxes a little bit, or by an appropriate amount. But now you can't do that,
Right.
because there's levels set at how much you can do.
Right.
So that's why a lot of people, of course, are going to the referendum.
Right. In our local governments, that our city governments, our villages, townships, they're now under a similar thing where they have a revenue limit, and that's they're struggling with that too because
Sure.
Whenever you put a formula in like that, it's not going to be perfect. All the school districts, all the villages, they're not the same. They're not in the same situation. So they're struggling with that now. As we went through with the schools, but. So we tried to address those fundamental flaws in it, and I think we made good progress. But we're not all the way done.
Okay.
But we do have, we are fortunate. I should always say that in this area, every school here, I think, is a really good school system. So we are fortunate.
Yes, I've found that to be the case so
Right.
often. With Governor Evers being the former superintendent of public instruction for the state, do you find that helpful?
Yeah, it does help. And I had worked with him some, prior to him being elected when he was state superintendent. And certainly that's his area of expertise. I think his struggle has been that his background is in a pretty narrow area, so he has to rely on other people for knowledge in all of the other vast number of issues that we deal with. But certainly on education, that's been his top priority and his area of expertise. So, there's definitely a focus on that, and it was reflected in the budget, I think. But I think both sides realize that, we need to do better, with the schools than we had been doing.
Okay,
So-
good. As long as everybody understands,
Yeah.
maybe we'll head in the right direction. Relating to that, we hear a lot about violence. We hear a lot about guns in schools. And the governor recently called a special session, which went rather quickly. But when we are talking about guns, how does the state look at that, and what do you see as the future for gun control or some form of government control for guns?
Yeah, that's a really, really tough issue because, I hear from people on both sides. It seems like half the people don't want us to do anything that might violate their constitutional rights to have a gun, and then other people that just think. Some of them think nobody should have a gun, So it's tough to bring those two sides together, and it has been very contentious. And as we talked about earlier, that if we could just sit down and really talk it out, I think that there are some areas where we could find some common ground. I think that the things that were brought forward for that special session are sort of feel-good things that make you feel like you're doing something, but when you really look at it, I don't believe that it really accomplishes much. When you look at universal background checks. Right now we require background checks on any sale through a licensed gun dealer, but not through, if I sell you a gun, there's no background check. So if you say we're going to require that on private sales, there's no way to enforce that, I mean, how does anybody know if I sell you a gun? Unless there would be a national gun registry where we would know where every gun was, and there are over 300 million guns in the country, it's impossible to enforce. And obviously the people that intend to break the law are not going to voluntarily get a background check. So I think that I have spoken a lot with our local law enforcement, both here in Kewaunee County and in Door County, and that's what I hear from them as well. It's like they don't believe that that's really going to make a difference or that it's enforceable. So we did last session. The Assembly passed a measure that for the background checks that are done, that we bring in all the databases, because there have been situations. There was one mass murder in Texas where a guy had committed a felony while he was in the military, but when he got a background check done, that one didn't show up in the database they were using. So we passed a bill to bring all those databases together so that things like that didn't happen, where things slipped through the cracks. Unfortunately, the Senate did not take that one up. But we did get one through, though, that increased the penalty on straw sales, which means that if I know you can't pass a background check, I buy a gun and then sell to you. And so we made that a felony. So I think that's another step in the right direction. So there are things that can be done, but I want the things that are done to be things that really make a difference, not things just so we can say, hey, we fixed the problem. Because if they don't really increase safety, then they're not very helpful. The other issue that has been brought up as part of that special session was the so-called red flag laws, where a person can report somebody that they think is a danger, and then the police would seize their guns. Again, talking to our local law enforcement, they don't support that, because right now people don't realize that they have more ability to do that than they might realize. If a family member has concerns about a family about their relative,
About a relative
Yeah.
who might be violent.
there's this Chapter 51 where they can call the police, and the police will go in and take their guns, but they're allowed to use their judgment and decide if the situation warrants it and all of that. The concern that I've heard from our sheriffs here is that if they make it, if they make this law, then you get into this thing where somebody's mad at somebody, so they report them, and then the police have to go in and seize the guns. And again, taking someone's guns, that is their constitutional right. So to take them without knowing that they actually are a threat, it can be problematic. So I do think, I'm not saying that there's not areas that we can find agreement on that, but the way that it is right now, I don't think that is very helpful. But we do have, again, there are ways right now that they can take guns. Certainly anybody that has committed a crime or domestic abuse is certainly, in that situation, they're allowed to go in and seize the gun. So there are ways that it's done now. And I think the public doesn't understand that. A lot of people don't. So I would like to work to expand it, as long as we're protective of people's rights. And we don't have this situation where you can make a false accusation and then the police have to come in and seize your guns. Then you have to fight to get them back and go to court and all of that. So
If we ever could resolve the issue with the guns, I think we would have resolved a whole lot.
It's-
two different sides.
yeah, it is one of the most difficult issues, just because the two sides just totally do not understand where the other one's coming from, and to find that common ground. One of my colleagues that's a Democrat, and he's a big hunter, and I had a beer with him the other night, and we said, man, if you and I could just sit down, I think we could come up with common sense. And actually, we are gonna try and work on some of that, but it's just to get the leadership because everybody wants to play politics with
Oh
it.
yes, yeah, and
And
if people, I think, could get away from the political aspect of it and
Right.
get into the discussion aspect and speaking together, I think that's
right. The way it is right now, anything that the Republican Party puts out, as I mentioned, we did those other things. The other side is going to say, "Oh, you're not going far enough," and I'm not blaming them, but that's just the reality. That it's just there's too much of playing politics with it, rather than just saying, what can we do?
yeah.
So
How can we solve some of these issues?
right,
You know,
and we're
do it.
it's just the atmosphere right now is not very conducive to that.
Well, as long as we're talking about controversial topics, what about birth control? Just want to throw that out. I
Yeah.
know that you've have been involved recently with a birth control bill, and maybe you could explain kind of how that works and the changes that have come about because
Sure. So, birth control right now, for a woman to get birth control, she has to have a doctor's prescription. So she has to go to a doctor, have an exam, get birth control. At this point, really, drugs are supposed to be prescription for two reasons. Either there's high abuse potential or there's safety concerns, whether that need a doctor's monitoring. At this point, birth control has changed so much over the years since it was first introduced that the safety concern is no longer there. Every single medical group, the American Medical Association, Wisconsin Medical Association, the College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, the pharmacists, the nurses, the family practitioners, they all say that it is safe enough right now, it could be over the counter. There's no reason to have to get a doctor's prescription. But we can't do that. We have to go as a state. Only the federal government can do that, the Food and Drug Administration. So what this bill does would be allow pharmacists to prescribe it. So a woman would go to a pharmacist, she would give them a questionnaire to fill out and check their blood pressure. If there were any red flags that were raised through that, then she has to go to the doctor. Otherwise, she can get birth control through them. The reason for doing this is, first off, unplanned pregnancies are just an unbelievably expensive problem for society, just from financial terms, not even getting into the human aspect of it. But we spend $286 for every woman in Wisconsin each year just to cover the birth expenses through Medicaid of paying for unplanned pregnancies. And on top of that, 43% of the unplanned pregnancies end in abortion. So I think we would reduce abortions if we can make birth control more accessible. And then you think of the women, it's like 10% of women that enter college end up dropping out because they get pregnant. And think of the long-term effects of that, where instead of being educated and having a career ahead of them, 2/3 of the time they end up on welfare after they. So it's like just a tremendous cost to this. So that's why, to make birth control more accessible, and I know it's controversial, and I truly respect those that are morally opposed to birth control. That's fine. I just don't think that it's the government's job to be putting those barriers up when there's no scientific reason to do so. So I wrote that bill, and it passed the Assembly last week. It'll still be it'll be a challenge to get it through the Senate, because sometimes only a couple of votes can kill a bill in the Senate. But it's a model that's been growing in the U.S. There are now 13 states that allow this, and they're blue states like California and Oregon, but there are also red states like Utah and Tennessee that have done this. So I think it makes a lot of sense that whatever you and I have talked about this, but I mean, being a parent is the most rewarding thing in my life.
Absolutely.
But it's also the greatest responsibility. I mean, I know for me, I'd stand in front of a bullet to protect my kids without thinking twice. And if you're not to that point where you can say that, I don't think you should be a parent. It's a tremendous responsibility, and people shouldn't go into that by accident or without thinking it through.
Yeah.
So that's why that's really the impetus behind it, I guess.
Yeah, and guys have been able to get birth control forever.
Yeah.
Well, it seems like forever.
Yeah.
A long time.
So
one final point today, and this gets back a little bit to the clear water and the question of that. The mill pond up in Forestville, they're planning on emptying that, and as of today's date, which is the 11th of November, I understand that they have probably gotten started on that already. How do you foresee that working out, and how does that affect your constituents?
Yeah, I don't have anything to do with that decision at all. That's a county decision. I did bring the DNR in. We had a meeting in this room to explain to people, especially in Algoma, what to expect, people in Kewaunee County in particular, what to expect when it happens. They were actually very reassuring that, yes, in the short term, the river's going to look bad. It's going to be higher, and there is going to be some sediment. It's drawn down gradually from the top, basically, so they're not pulling up a lot of sediment.
Yeah, and hopefully some of that settlement will settle.
And that's the theory behind it is once they've dried it out, that compacts at the bottom, and so then it doesn't get into the water anymore. Because right now, the water coming out of that mill pond it's really bad. It's horrible because, and part of the reason is it's shallow. There's decades of phosphorus built up there, and you have a lot of carp living in there, stirring it up all the time. So the phosphorus coming down the Yanapee River right now, or prior to the drawdown, is really bad. And I think if we're ever going to clean that river up, we can't have that, because no matter what efforts we make down here, if you have this, sending water down, it's not going to clear up. Yes, it would have been nice if they could have dredged it mechanically and not drawn it down, but that was ridiculously expensive. So again, it wasn't my decision, but that's the decision they came to. So in the short term, for the next year, probably people in Kewaunee County will look at that river and say, oh, it's a mess. But the DNR has done this at least 15 times that they discussed this at that meeting, and they guaranteed that when this is all done, if we look back in 3 years or so, the river will be in better condition than it's been in our lifetimes. So I think long term, from what they tell me, and this is what's happened in all the other rivers where they've done it, it will be beneficial to the Yanapee River. But yeah, in the short term, not quite so much.
We'll see.
Yeah. So.
I hope you'll come back again, and we can discuss.
Well, I stopped by today at the mill pond on my way down here to look at it and see how it was coming.
Still looked about as high as it had been?
You can't tell much difference.
All right. So we can say that as of November 11th, 2019, the mill pond still has quite a bit of water in it, but we'll watch that situation as it proceeds. That's going to do it for our show today. Joel, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We've been speaking with Joel Kitchens, who is the 1st Assembly District Representative for northeastern Wisconsin. And we hope that you will join us again when it's time for your city, your county. I'm Bob Gray, and I hope you have a great day today. Thanks for joining us. So long.